All right, everyone, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into Idiocracy.
Idiocracy, huh? Sounds like we're in for a fun one.
Oh, it definitely is. This movie, it came out back in 2006, throws us into this future where, well, let's just say intelligence isn't exactly thriving.
I've heard of it, but never actually seen it. What's the basic premise?
So they take this totally average guy and accidentally launch him like 500 years into the future. And guess what? He ends up being the smartest person on the planet.
Okay, now that's a hilarious concept. I'm starting to see why we're doing a deep dive on this. Using comedy to maybe make us think a little, huh?
Exactly. It's satire at its finest. So for those who haven't seen it, imagine this average Joe, his name's actually Joe Bauers, wakes up in this future where everything's gone a bit wonky.
Wonky how?
Wonky in the sense that common sense has flown the coop and critical thinking is about as rare as, I don't know, decent cup of coffee in a gas station.
Ouch, that's a rough comparison.
Yeah.
But I get it. So this average Joe becomes a genius by default. That's got to be a wild ride for him.
Talk about a fish out of water. It's like going from being the class clown to suddenly being asked to solve world hunger. And speaking of wild, the world of Idiocracy is visually insane. Everything is super bright, loud, and basically one giant advertisement.
So like Times Square on steroids?
Times Square on steroids, exactly.
Oh.
And it's also shallow, just like the society the movie's poking fun at. Mike Judge, the director, he's the guy behind Office Space, you know. He uses that same satirical edge to critique this whole consumerism thing we've got going on.
Yeah, our addiction to instant gratification and all that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to spoil too much, but there's this one scene where they're trying to figure out why crops are dying, and the solution they come up with, well, let's just say it makes you wonder about the decisions we make in real life sometimes.
I'm intrigued. So who are the main players in this circus?
Well, there's Joe, our accidental hero. Then you've got Rita, a woman who initially seems like a certain type of character, but turns out to be much smarter than you'd expect.
Oh, I love when characters defy expectations. And what about the president? You can't have a dystopian future without a wacky leader, right?
Oh, President Camacho. He's in a league of his own. Think all brawn, very little brains, hilarious speeches that make you wonder how he even got elected.
So basically, he's a walking, talking satire of what happens when style wins over substance, especially in leadership.
You hit the nail on the head. It's scary and funny all at the same time, which I think is what makes Idiocracy so brilliant.
So far, so good. But we've only scratched the surface, right? There's got to be more to this movie than just laughs.
Oh, absolutely. Idiocracy throws a lot of big ideas our way, stuff that really makes you think about the direction we're heading as a society.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, one of the core themes is this whole decline of intelligence thing. It's not just about book smarts, but like common sense, the ability to think for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. What else?
Well, it takes aim at consumerism, showing a world where corporations control everything and people are basically just mindless consumers, constantly bombarded with ads and useless stuff.
Oof, I feel seen. It's like they're saying, hey, wake up, people.
Right. And it makes you wonder if our obsession with stuff is really making us happy or just more, well, idiotic.
Heavy stuff.
And don't even get me started on the environmental message. Idiocracy shows a world ravaged by pollution and resource depletion where nobody seems to give a damn.
Oh, man. So this movie is like a hilarious slap in the face to humanity.
Basically. But here's the thing. It's become more than just a movie. It's like this cultural reference point that people use all the time to describe what they see happening around them.
So it's like idiocracy has become a verb. Like, oh, man, that's so idiocracy.
Exactly. Which is kind of funny, but also a little unsettling, you know?
Yeah, a little too close to home, maybe.
Maybe. But it's interesting how a comedy can spark such serious discussions.
You're right. There's definitely more to unpack here.
Way more. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive into some of the most memorable scenes and what makes them so darn funny, yet thought-provoking. All right, welcome back to our Idiocracy Deep Dive. Now, I don't know about you, but my brain's still buzzing after that first segment. This movie, it really packs a punch, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But I think it's time to get into the nitty-gritty, you know? Let's talk about some of the scenes that make Idiocracy so memorable, the ones that are funny as hell, but also make you go, it's kind of deep.
Well, absolutely, because it's those scenes that really nail that satirical sweet spot.
Yeah.
Right? The ones where you're laughing your butt off one minute and then the next you're like, wait a second, is that a commentary on our own society?
Exactly. Like, for instance, there's that scene where Joe, our time-traveling hero, stumbles into a hospital in this dystopian future.
Oh, my God, the hospital scene. Imagine this. You walk into a hospital expecting, doctors and nurses and medical equipment. But in Idiocracy, it's like stepping into a fever dream.
A fever dream? In what way?
Well, instead of competent medical professionals, you've got people running around in costumes, technology that seems designed to malfunction, and everyone he talks to is utterly clueless about basic healthcare.
Okay, now that's just hilarious. But hold on. I'm sensing a deeper meaning here. What's the satire pointing at?
I think it's a critique of how bureaucratic systems, like healthcare, can become so bloated and convoluted that they lose sight of their original purpose to actually help people. It's like they're so caught up in the red tape that they forget about the human beings at the heart of it all.
Right. The system becomes the problem, not the solution. That's a powerful message, especially when you consider how complex and often frustrating navigating healthcare can be in our own time.
And then there's that scene in the grocery store, the one where Joe's just bombarded with an overwhelming number of choices, all plastered with corporate branding.
Oh, yeah, the grocery store scene. I remember that one. Everything, even the produce had some ridiculous brand name attached to it, like Carl's Jr. All Natural Potatoes or something like that.
Exactly. It's like the entire food system has been hijacked by marketing, and nobody even questions it. And it makes you think, are we so conditioned to associate everything with a brand that we've lost touch with what real food even is? Like, do we even know what an unbranded apple looks like anymore?
It's funny, but also kind of scary, right? Because it makes you wonder if we're really making conscious choices about what we're consuming, or are we just being manipulated by marketing and this whole culture of consumerism?
Exactly. And Idiocracy doesn't shy away from showing us the potential consequences of that kind of mindless consumption, both for ourselves and for the environment.
Right. They really drive that point home with the environmental imagery in the film.
Absolutely. But let's move on to another scene that I think perfectly captures the genius of Idiocracy. Joe's first encounter with President Camacho.
Oh, President Camacho, a true icon of satirical cinema. What makes that scene so special?
Well, you've got this leader of the free world, this guy who's supposed to be, making important decisions, but he's more concerned with putting on a show, with being entertaining, than with actually addressing the real problems facing society. It's all flash and new substance.
It's like he's running a reality TV show instead of a country. And it makes you wonder if we're not already kind of doing that in real life, prioritizing style over substance, especially when it comes to our leaders.
Right. Think about how much emphasis we place on image and how easily we can be swayed by charisma and empty promises. It's like we're setting ourselves up to be ruled by the most entertaining candidate rather than the most qualified one. And that's a pretty scary thought, right?
It is, and I think that's what makes Idiocracy so brilliant. It's not just a bunch of silly jokes. It's using humor to hold up a mirror to our own society and make us question our values, our choices, and the direction we're headed. It's making us laugh, sure, but it's also making us think. And that's a rare and powerful combination.
Exactly. It's like sneaking in some vegetables with that delicious dessert,
Yeah.
You're enjoying the sweetness, but you're also getting something nutritious without even realizing it.
And sometimes a little bit of satirical medicine is exactly what we need to wake up and see the world with a more critical eye. Because if we're not careful, we might just end up living in a world where Brando is the only thing keeping our plants alive.
Oh, God, don't even joke about that. Okay, let's take a moment to let all that sink in because we've covered a lot of ground here. All right, deep divers, we're back and ready to wrap things up with Idiocracy. We've laughed, we've cringed, and maybe we've even learned a thing or two about ourselves along the way.
I know I have. This movie, it really makes you think, doesn't it? But now, the big question, what does it all mean? What's the takeaway here? We can't just leave our listeners hanging, right?
Exactly, because as funny as Idiocracy is, it's hard to ignore that little voice in the back of your head saying, wait a minute, are we really that far off from this?
Right. So let's get serious for a minute. What are the big lessons Idiocracy wants us to learn?
Well, for me, one of the most obvious ones is the importance of critical thinking. That ability to question things, to not just blindly accept everything you see and hear.
Yeah, the movie really drives home that point. It shows what can happen when we stop thinking for ourselves, when we let ourselves be spoon-fed information and entertainment without ever questioning it.
Like in the movie, they literally water their plants with Brando, this energy drink, because that's what the advertising tells them to do. And nobody even stops to think, hey, maybe plants don't actually need electrolytes.
It's a hilarious example, but it makes you wonder how often we do that in our own lives, just accepting things at face value without really thinking them through. And it's not just about book smarts either. It's about that common sense, that gut feeling that tells you something's not quite right.
Totally. Like The other day, I saw this headline online that was so obviously fake, but people were sharing it like it was the gospel truth. And I just thought, man, are we really that gullible?
Yeah, it's scary how easily misinformation can spread, especially when we're not actively engaging our critical thinking skills. And Idiocracy definitely makes you more aware of that danger.
So critical thinking, check. What else?
Well, I think the movie's critique of consumerism is pretty hard to miss. The world of Idiocracy is like this hyper-commercialized nightmare where everything is branded and people are constantly being told what to buy and what to want.
It's like they've lost sight of what's truly important, what really brings happiness and fulfillment. They're just chasing the next shiny object, the next quick fix.
And it makes you wonder if we're not heading down that same path sometimes, right? I mean, think about how much of our lives revolves around buying things, acquiring stuff.
It's easy to get caught up in that cycle, to believe that happiness comes from having more, newer, better things. But Idiocracy shows us just how empty that pursuit can be.
Exactly. It's a reminder to be mindful of our consumption habits, to ask ourselves if we really need all this stuff or if we're just being manipulated by advertising and this whole consumer culture.
And then, of course, there's the environmental message, which is pretty hard-hitting, especially when you see the state of the world in the movie.
Yeah, the environment's basically trashed, resources are depleted, and nobody seems to care. It's like they've traded a healthy planet for convenience and short-term gains.
It's definitely a wake-up call to start taking our environmental impact more seriously. We can't just keep consuming and polluting without consequences.
Right, we've got to start thinking about future generations, about the kind of world we're leaving behind.
So we've got critical thinking, mindful consumption, and environmental responsibility. Those are some pretty heavy takeaways from a movie that's also hilarious and entertaining.
And that's what makes Idiocracy so brilliant, right? It manages to deliver these important messages without being preachy or condescending. It makes you laugh, but it also makes you think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a movie that stays with you long after the credits roll. And even if you don't agree with every point it makes, it's hard to deny that it raises some really important questions about the direction we're headed as a society.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, especially you, Bodhi, we highly recommend checking out Idiocracy if you haven't already.
It's a movie that will make you laugh, make you think, and maybe even inspire you to make a few changes in your own life. And who knows, maybe if we all start paying attention to these issues, we can avoid ending up in that dystopian future.
Well said. Because at the end of the day, we all have a choice to make. We can either be passive consumers and let the world happen to us, or we can be active citizens and help shape a better future for ourselves and for generations to come. So, until next time, keep those brains sharp, those hearts open, and those critical thinking skills engaged. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Idiocracy.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics. See you next time.